Hello, I'm Patrick McGuire, and thank you for joining us again in our series of Overcoming the Paradigms of Christianity. And in this sixth part of our series, we're going to cover an issue that is difficult for many people to discuss. We're going to talk about the holidays of Christianity versus the holy days or the appointed times of Yahweh. Now, for most Christians, we're going to look at Christmas first off, and for most Christians, this time of Christmas is a time of family, it's a time of gathering, it's a time of church services that are more emotional, more heartfelt than others. And we're going to ask, is it really the right thing to do to celebrate this holiday that is called Christmas? Should the followers of Yeshua celebrate Christmas? Well, few people realize that not very much has changed in the way Christmas is celebrated from the way pagans observed December 25th centuries before the birth of Messiah. Obviously, they didn't call it Christmas. They called this midwinter festival by its original heathen or pagan name, the Saturnalia. In ancient times, the winter solstice was celebrated in Babylon as the birthday of Tammuz, the god of vegetation. This was the shortest day of the year in the latter part of December. Now, according to the pagans, the god Nimrod would visit the evergreen tree and leave gifts upon it. This festival became known as the Saturnalia, and friends and family would exchange gifts. Roman worshippers of Mithra, the Persian sun god, also celebrated the winter solstice as the nativity or birth of the sun. When the feast was celebrated in Rome, it was called the Festival of Saturn and lasted for 5 days. In ancient Rome and Babylon, this festival involved wild parties and orgies that might have begun with an innocent kiss underneath the mistletoe, leading to justification of all sorts of perverted behavior. Now, where did December 25th come from? This is a very good question. Now, the New Encyclopedia Britannica states, December 25th, the birthday of Mithra, the Iranian god of light, and the day devoted to the invincible sun, as well as the day after Saturnalia, was adopted by the Roman Catholic Church as Christmas, the nativity of Christ, to counteract the effects of these festivals. Now, the concept of the Mass is embedded in the English term Christmas. Its etymology being traced to the Old English words Christus Mass, meaning the Mass or Festival of Christ. The New Catholic Encyclopedia says the birth of Christ was assigned to the date of the winter solstice, December 25th in the Julian calendar, January 6th in the Egyptian, because on this day, as the sun began to return to its northern skies, the pagan devotees of Mithra celebrated the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, birthday of the invincible sun. Christianity thus replaced a pagan holiday with a Christian one, while keeping the same symbolism. The birthday of Christ corresponds to the birth of a pagan New Year. Many of the pagan customs became part of the Christmas celebrations. Have you ever just sat down and wondered why a tree set up in your house would have anything to do with Yeshua, his birth, or his life? Why would we decorate a tree with all its fancy balls and lights and ornaments and put it in our house for the sake of Yeshua? Why would we bow down before it to lay down gifts? Let us now take a closer look and just see where this tradition came from. Now, says historian Alexander Hislop of this particular custom. The Christmas tree, now so common among us, was equally common in pagan Rome and pagan Egypt. In Egypt, that tree was the palm tree. In Rome, it was the fir. The palm tree denoting the pagan Messiah as Baal Tamar. The fir referred to him as Baal Berit. The mother of Adonis, the sun god and great mediatorial divinity, was mystically said to have been changed into a tree, and when in that state to have brought forth her divine son. If the mother was a tree, the son must have been recognized as the branch. And this entirely accounts for putting the Yule log into the fire on Christmas Eve and into the appearance of the Christmas tree the next morning. What's wrong with celebrating a pagan holiday as long as we dedicate this formerly pagan thing to Jesus? I've heard this time and time again. I don't celebrate a pagan holiday. I celebrate the birthday of Jesus. Well, the problem with that is, first of all, we know he was not born on December 25th. He was likely born in the fall, not in the winter. People didn't keep watch over their flocks by night. in the wintertime, as they say, that we're doing at the time of the birth of Yeshua. So what is wrong with celebrating a pagan holiday? As long as we don't no longer sacrifice our children to it. We do some of the same things they did, but now we're doing it for God, we're doing it for Jesus. What's wrong with that? Well, Scripture talks about this. In Deuteronomy 12, starting at verse 1, it says, "These are the statutes and the judgments which you shall carefully observe in the land which Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, has given you to possess, as long as you live. You shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations whom you dispossess serve their gods, on every high mountain and on the hills and under every green tree." He tells them to destroy every remnant of their pagan idolatry that they formerly did. He continues in verse 3, "And you shall tear down their altars and smash their sacred pillars and burn their asherim with fire. And you shall cut down the engraved images of their gods, and you shall obliterate their name from that place. You shall not act like this toward Yahweh your Elohim." He says you will not take these things that they used to worship their God and act like that towards me. You will not do it. It is tantamount to a wife honoring her husband by using some things that she did with her old boyfriend. Maybe his favorite foods, maybe honoring, instead of her husband's birthday, honor his birthday on her old boyfriend's birthday. Doing those types of things. Keeping pictures of the old boyfriends or old girlfriends around. Those types of things are not tolerated within an intimate covenant relationship. Elohim says the same exact thing. Of course, the wife could say, "Honey, I'm honoring you, not him. He's not here." But he wants no part of that. He wants no part of the old boyfriend's birthday, even though it's dedicated to him. He wants no part of the things that he gave her in a previous time. What he wants is devotion and dedication from his wife to him, and respect. What this is showing is the ultimate lack of respect for the Father. He continues in Deuteronomy 12. Let's go down to the latter part of that chapter, starting at verse 29. "When Yahweh your Elohim cuts off before you the nations which you are going in to dispossess, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, beware that you're not ensnared to follow them after they're destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, 'How do these nations serve their gods, that I also may do likewise?'" Verse 31, "You shall not behave thus toward Yahweh your Elohim, for every abominable act which Yahweh hates they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Whatever I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to, nor take away from it." So he says, when you do not do those things that they did for their gods, do not do those things toward me at all. He wants all those things obliterated. He does not want that in the lives of his people, period. And he says, whatever I command you, you'll be careful to do. Do not add to it. Do not take away from it. Well, let's look at the history of Christmas, specifically the Christmas trees first. We'll start here. And this is information I got from the History Channel, usually a fairly reliable source for, hey, history. So let's look at how it all got started. Long before the advent of Christianity, plants and trees that remain green all year long had a special meaning for people in the winter. Just as people today decorate their homes during the festive season with pine, spruce, and fir trees, ancient peoples hung evergreen boughs over their doors and windows. In many countries, it was believed that evergreens would keep away witches, ghosts, evil spirits, and illness. In the northern hemisphere, the shortest day and longest night of the year falls on December 21st or December 22nd and is called the winter solstice. And many people believed that the sun was a god and that winter came every year because the sun god had become sick and weak. They celebrated the solstice because it meant that at last the sun god would begin to get well. Evergreen boughs reminded them of the green plants that would grow again when the sun god was strong and summer would return. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a god called Ra, who had the head of a hawk and wore the sun as a blazing disk in his crown. Now at the solstice, when Ra began to recover from the illness, the Egyptians filled their homes with green palm rushes, which symbolized for them the triumph of life over death. Early Romans marked the solstice with a feast called Saturnalia in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture. The Romans knew that the solstice meant that soon farms and orchards would be green and fruitful. To mark the occasion, they decorated their homes and temples with evergreen boughs. In northern Europe, the mysterious Druids, the priests of the ancient Celts, also decorated their temples with evergreen boughs as a symbol of everlasting life. The fierce Vikings in Scandinavia thought that evergreens were the special plant of the sun god, Balder. Germany is credited with starting the Christmas tree tradition as we know it in the 16th century when devout Christians brought decorated trees into their homes. Some built Christmas pyramids of wood and decorated them with evergreens and candles if wood was scarce. It is a widely held belief that Martin Luther, the 16th century Protestant reformer, first added lighted candles to a tree. Walking toward his home one winter evening, composing a sermon, he was awed by the brilliance of the stars twinkling amidst evergreens. To recapture the scene for his family, he erected a tree in the main room and wired its branches with lighted candles. Most 19th century Americans found Christmas trees an oddity. The first record of one being on display was in the 1830s by the German settlers of Pennsylvania, although trees had been a tradition in many German homes much earlier. The Pennsylvanian German settlements had community trees as early as 1747, but as late as the 1840s, Christmas trees were seen as pagan symbols and rightly not accepted by most Americans. It is not surprising that, like many other festive Christmas customs, the tree was adopted so late in America. To the New England Puritans, Christmas was sacred. The Pilgrim's second governor, William Bradford, wrote that he had tried hard to stamp out pagan mockery of the observance, penalizing any frivolity. The influential Oliver Cromwell preached against the heathen traditions of Christmas carols, decorated trees, and any joyful expression that desecrated that alleged sacred event. In 1659, the General Court of Massachusetts enacted a law making any observance of December 25th, other than just an ordinary church service, a penal offense. People were fined for hanging decorations. That stern solemnity continued until the 19th century, when the influx of German and Irish immigrants undermined the Puritan legacy. So says the History Channel. Well, let's look at what Scripture says. Do we know of anything about trees and their pagan use from Scripture? Let's look at Jeremiah 10, starting at verse 1, where it says, "Hear the word which Yahweh speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says Yahweh, do not learn the way of the nations, and do not be terrified by the signs of the heavens, although the nations are terrified by them." Now, Deuteronomy 16, verse 21 tells us, we're going to come back to Jeremiah in just a moment, says, "You shall not plant for yourself an Asherah of any kind of tree beside the altar of Yahweh your Elohim, which you shall make for yourself." Now, this was against, an Asherah was a planting of trees for worship purposes, and that was prohibited in Deuteronomy. And we see also this Asherah as in 1 Kings chapter 16, starting at verse 31, "And it came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worshipped him. So he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built for Samaria. And Ahab also made the Asherah. Thus Ahab did more to provoke Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, than all the kings of Israel who were before him." So this is what Ahab did, involving trees and worship that provoked the Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, more than all of the kings of Israel before him. Going back to Jeremiah 10, verse 3, we see, "For the customs of the peoples are a delusion, because it is wood cut from the forest, the work of the hands of a craftsman with a cutting tool." Now, if you look at a different translation, it comes out a little bit different. In the New King James, it says, for instance, "For the customs of the peoples are futile. For one cuts a tree from the forest, the hands of the workman with the axe." So what we have is a man really just going out and cutting a tree. And let's see what he does with this. In verse 4, they decorate it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers so that it will not totter. Does that sound familiar by any chance? It's exactly what Christianity and the world does approaching December 25th. Going back to Deuteronomy 12, once again, we're told, these are the statutes and the judgments which you shall carefully observe in the land which Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, has given you to possess. As long as you live on the earth, you shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every green tree. Make no mistake, green trees were a big part of pagan worship, and they still are today. Once again, going back to 2 Kings 16, starting in verse 2, Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not do what was right in the sight of Yahweh his Elohim, as his father David had done. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, even made his sons pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the nations whom Yahweh had driven out from before the sons of Israel. And he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Now, we may think, I'm not sacrificing my children under every green tree. That's not the point. The point is, it is involved. Christmas trees are a part of the alleged worship of God or worship of Jesus' birthday, or whatever you want to call it, however you want to excuse it. Elohim says he wants no part of it. And what he did here is Ahaz, Jezebel, and others, he said this is an abomination, and he will not put up with it. Jeremiah 2 verse 20 says, "For long ago I broke your yoke and tore off your bonds, but you said, I will not serve. For on every high hill and under every green tree you have laid down as a harlot." You can reject Scripture if you want, but if you think you're getting closer to God by putting up a stupid Christmas tree in your living room and decorating it and exchanging gifts on the day of the sun god, on the day of the birth of the sun god, all you're doing is making yourself feel good, and what you're doing is building a wall between yourself and Elohim. Ezekiel 6 verse 13 says, "Then you will know that I am Yahweh, when their slain are among their idols around their altars, on every high hill, on all the tops of mountains, under every green tree, and under every leafy oak, the places where they offered soothing aroma to all their idols." Under every green tree. Where do we put the precious things on Christmas morning that everyone is gathered around and kneeling down on the floor and in such trepidation toward one another and eagerness? It's under a green tree. Where does that come from? Going back to Jeremiah 10, verse 5 says, "Like a scarecrow in a cucumber field are they, and they cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not fear them, they can do no harm, nor can they do any good." He says the pagan customs of that day, they're not going to hurt you. Do not get involved with them. These people feared these things. They feared these things as gods. Don't let them be a part of your life. Look at what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 6, starting at verse 14. "Do not be bound together with unbelievers. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness?" Good question. "Or what fellowship has light with darkness? Or what harmony has Messiah with Belial? Or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? Or what agreement has the temple of Elohim with idols? For we are the temple of the living Elohim, just as Elohim said, I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people." If you're one of his and you have the spirit of Elohim dwelling within you and you involve yourself in this pagan idolatry, it's worse than lack of respect for the Father. It is absolutely an abomination. Verse 17 says, "Therefore come out from their midst and be separate, says Yahweh. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will welcome you." He just said in verse 16 that I'll dwell in them and walk among them and be their Elohim, and they'll be my people, and do not touch what is unclean. And that is definitely what we're talking about with Christmas, is one big unclean pagan festival that was dedicated to the sacrifice of children and to the birth of the sun god. Verse 18, he says, "And I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says Yahweh Almighty. Therefore, having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of Elohim." What is holiness? The word holy means to be set apart, being set apart for Elohim, not to be set apart to be a part of pagan functions, pagan traditions, pagan festivals that were in days past dedicated to different gods, dedicated to the worship of different deities that didn't exist, or if they did exist, they were just merely demon figures. The children, once again, were sacrificed to. Elohim says, I want no part of that with my people. Well, let's take a look at a little bit more of the Christmas season. See if we can get you in the spirit. 'Tis the season for paganism and idolatry. Now, isn't playing Santa Claus just some harmless fun? You know, that's what many people claim. The Santa Claus figure, ho, 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 little kid sitting in the lap. Let's make this big deal out of Jesus' birthday, even though we know it's not his birthday. You know, I don't recall one place in Scripture where they celebrated Jesus' birthday. Does anybody recall that? Wasn't Santa Claus modeled after some kind man named St. Nicholas in the 4th century? No. Nicholas's existence is not attested by any historical document. So nothing certain is known of his life except that he was probably Bishop Myra in the 4th century. That comes from the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1999. St. Nicholas lived in the 4th century. He's a Christian prelate, patron saint of Russia, traditionally associated with Christmas celebrations. The accounts of his life are confused and historically unconfirmed. That's from the Microsoft Encarta Encyclopedia of 1999. Unfortunately, very little is known about the real Santa Claus. Countless legends have grown up around this popular saint, but very little historical evidence is available. That comes from the Christmas Almanac from 2004. In 1969, the final nail in the coffin to the feeble fable of St. Nicholas was officially hammered down. Despite the fact St. Nicholas is among Roman Catholicism's most popular and venerated saints. Pope Paul VI officially decreed the Feast of St. Nicholas removed from the Roman Catholic calendar. UPI Wire Services reported that St. Nicholas and 40 other saints were deleted because of doubt that they ever existed. We see, once again, Microsoft Encarta Encyclopedia, 1999, because the saint's life is so unreliably documented, Pope Paul VI ordered the Feast of St. Nicholas dropped from the official Roman Catholic calendar in 1969. So where did Santa come from? This is a good question. Nearly all Santa researchers, and believe it or not, there are actually Santa researchers. They're about as important as evolutionary biologists. Nearly all Santa researchers agree that some traits of Santa was borrowed from Norse mythology or Scandinavian mythology. Encyclopedia Britannica describes the role of Nordic mythology in the life of Santa. Sinterklaas was adopted by the country's English-speaking majority under the name Santa Claus, and his legend of a kindly old man was united with old Nordic folk tales of a magician who punished naughty children and rewarded good children with presents. That comes from, once again, Encyclopedia Britannica of 1999. And I'm going to stop right here because we're stopping at a pretty good place. We're going to pick up where we left off on this study of where Santa Claus came from. We saw where the Christmas tree came from. It came from pagan ritual, and it was pagan ritual even way back in the times before King David. It was adopted by his people, and he destroyed Israel for it. He called kings evil for participating in it. And to think that nowadays he's going to look at it and not care is truly a folly of our imagination. And I want to thank you for joining us, and we will pick up next time looking at the history and origins of Santa Claus. Thank you very much, and may Elohim greatly bless you.